So here's what we're going to do today, right? I know you guys are probably familiar with cryptos, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of background on what it's like to work in Washington, D.C., because it's really strange and it's really bizarre. Then I'm going to give you a little bit of view of what it's like from the chairman's office. What does that look like? And then I'm going to talk about Bitcoin and then the future of Bitcoin. So we cool with that? So I was the first chief market intelligence officer of this agency, and my background is in trading. I traded currencies from 1984 until 1999, and from 99 to about 2013. I was the bank's chief market intelligence officer. I was the global currency and public policy strategist during the financial crisis. So that was a lot of fun. I got to see a lot of really interesting things. And then just for the last couple of years, I took this job working for the CFTC. I am now back in Chicago. I'm a political economist. People hire me to do the mashup between politics, tech, regulation, a whole bunch of different things. So I break down complexity for people so it's easier for them to understand. So that's what I do. And I do podcasts as well. Engage with Andy Busch is a podcast that you guys can download right now. I highly recommend you do it. I cover a lot of interesting topics. I did an interview on China that's been in the news quite a bit, right, with a Peterson Institute of Economics expert. That was great. And then just today, I interviewed a guy who's a meteorologist. So if you're interested in what's going on in ag or how that impacts the economy, all the rain that we've been having, that's a really good one to check out. Again, it's Engage with Andy Busch. All right, so what was my role at the agency? So I was the chief market intelligence officer, and that meant I had three things that I had to do for the agency. First and foremost, I reported directly to the chairman of the agency, and I had a team of 30 researchers covering market dynamics, liquidity, and fragmentation. Ladies and gentlemen, that is bigger than almost every investment bank's research team. And we had the best data on the planet because we had the positions of all the major players in the futures markets and in the swaps markets. Think about that. Name a hedge fund that you think has really got its act together and is really popular and is really profitable. I could see what their positions were every day and how they changed. That helped me understand the markets a lot better and understand the market narrative, which drove a lot of the prices and trends and momentum. So that was one thing that I did for the agency. The other thing that I did for the agency was I was charged with communicating this information out to the public. Of course, that's non-public information, so it was a little bit tricky, but so I did presentations for Congress, for the Treasury, for the SEC, and for the White House. So that was part of my remit as the Chief Market Intelligence Officer. And then finally, with that, well, and on top of that, I also created a podcast for the agency, CFTC Talks. This is really good. We did 77 podcasts in about a year and a half covering a wide range of interesting topics, including Bitcoin. So if you've ever heard of Andreessen Horowitz, check out some of those podcasts because we had their people on talking about what was going on in that space. All right, so that's my job, right? That's what I was doing for the agency. Now let me give you a little bit of context of what it was like to work in Washington, D.C., because I'm sure you're kind of curious about that. What is it like to go there, right? So this is what you got to keep in mind about Washington, D.C., right? There are 6,000 accredited journalists covering the Capitol in Washington, D.C. 6,000. That is a lot of mouths to feed, and they are constantly hungry. Right? So here's the thing you got to remind yourself about Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., there's someone always out to get you. In Washington, D.C., there's someone always out to get you. In Washington, D.C., there's someone always out to get you. It's the music in the elevator when you're going up in the D.C. world and when you are coming down. It's why you have to begin every speech as a government official with this. The views I express are my own and don't reflect that of the CFTC, the White House, or the U.S. government. It's a massive case of CYA. Everybody's nervous about somebody ratting them out about whatever they're doing. It's incredible. Now, let me ask you a question. Who do you think is the most hated agency in Washington, D.C.? Just shout it out. SEC? No, not quite. How about the IRS, right? That's a good one. How about ICE, right? Think about the raids that were supposed to happen this weekend, which didn't, right? Or how about the Department of Justice, right? DOJ. We know that's not the president's favorite, right? Well, I hate to tell you, but you're all wrong. The most hated agency in Washington, D.C. was my agency, the CFTC. And you know why? Because there's only one metric in Washington, D.C. that matters, and that's money. And during the drunken sailor spending spree, commonly known as the budget process of 2018, my agency had its funding cut. Think about that. Basically, Congress was blowing money with a leaf blower out to every agency, but we had our funding cut. And it gets worse. They gave the Department of Justice $3 billion extra dollars that they didn't ask for. This is the guys with the Mueller team that were investigating the president. So if you think about it, really, our agency brought Republicans and Democrats together, right? That was a nice thing to do. Guys, I'm kind of telling some jokes up here, and you're killing me. You can laugh anytime you want, but that's really weird, right? It's very strange that would happen, but it's true. People really hated us. All right, so that's the house that I got to play in Washington, D.C. All right, so keep that in mind. Someone's always out to get you, and we're the most hated agency. So those two things. All right, so what's it like to be at the top of the house, right? Let's go to the top of the house. Let's talk about the chairman. So how do these people get their jobs, right? Have you ever wondered that? I did all the time. And here's how it works, right? Basically, for the tops of these agencies, these are people that supported the president during the campaign. Now, that could have been with donations. It could have been bundling, getting other donors together. But it also could have been in writing research. Basically, these people have to be like-minded with the president when it comes to policy. And that's really key. So if your guy wins, right, then you kind of go in and negotiate maybe a little bit of what you want, believe it or not. And sometimes you get put forward, sometimes you don't. Basically, you get vetted by the transition team, and if they give you the thumbs up, then they'll put you forward, hopefully, to the committee that's overseeing your agency, okay? And if they decide to move forward on you, right, then you get brought up and you have to go in front of hearings, and they kind of grill you a little bit. And if that goes well and you get out of committee, then it goes to the full Senate, they vote on you, and happy days, you're in like Flint, right? So you're in at the head of that agency. But if you think about it, what's been going on recently, right? I can think of 3 major agencies that do not have actually chairman of those agencies. They have acting chairman. ICE, right? DHS, and DOD. Think about that. 3 major agencies within the U.S. government that do not have chairman. They have acting chairman. As a matter of fact, the president's own chief of staff is an acting chief of staff. He's not even full-time yet because the president has given him the go-ahead to do it. Think about that for a minute. And if you look back to what just happened over the past weekend when the head of the Department of Labor resigned, Acosta, this is why people don't go into government. And it's a shame because there's a lot of really wonderful things that can happen there. I know I had a fantastic experience. That's a much longer discussion. But I will tell you, this is what's going on in D.C. And if you're wondering why it's so crazy, that's why. So let's talk about the chairman. And let's say your guy got in. What does he have to do when he gets there? Well, obviously, his agenda has to be like-minded to the president, right? It has to be very similar. And in this particular case with the CFTC, it was a reform agenda that was coming in. Right? So that was good. But here's the tricky part. You also have to bring in with you staff, right? As John mentioned, the division managers in the case of the CFTC who are like-minded as well, because these are the guys that are going to help you execute your agenda. And they're just as critical as you are. Now, that's a really important thing to remember. And then on top of it, you have to know who the key players are in Congress, right? You got to know who's going to support you within the committee that you're working with to change regulations and law as it pertains to your space that you're in. And then you got to know the important trade associations as well. So there's a lot of people in that ecosystem that you have to marshal forward to get your agenda done. So let's do a little compare and contrast between what was going on at the CFTC and the U.S. Treasury to show you kind of some of the problems that are going on there. Okay, at the CFTC, Christian Carlo, he worked there for 3 years prior to becoming chairman, right? So that was very helpful. Over at Treasury, Mnuchin had never worked in the Treasury, but he obviously had a lot of familiarity with them and had obviously owned a bank, so that was a good thing. Chris got, over at the CFTC, he got his leadership team together and in place really in the first 4 to 5 months. at Treasury to this day, they're missing about 12 people in key roles. So think about that. Think about how difficult it would be for Mnuchin to get things done over at Treasury. And then finally, when it comes to knowing the space, obviously Chris knew it extraordinarily well. It took Mnuchin a little while to get that up and running. So you can kind of get a glimpse into some of the problems you can have. Now, even if you have that all together, you can still run into potholes, right? Things like, I don't know, over at the SEC, think about the Edgar hacking scandal and how that put Clayton's agenda back. Or how about over at the FTC, talking about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, right? These are the things that set back agendas. And even in our agency, without a scandal, we had, of course, Bitcoin. So let me talk just really quickly about how that came about. So when Bitcoin, right, that was an interesting development. Now, I came into the agency, I knew about Bitcoin before I came there, but I really didn't know that much. And if you go back to 2016, the two major exchanges, the CBOE and the CME, had told their members they were going to push for a futures contract on Bitcoin, right? And so in 2017, they were interacting with the CFTC to bring about a futures contract. Now, the cool thing about this is that 8 exchanges can self-certify. And they can basically say, this contract's not manipulated, we feel comfortable with it, bam, and you can go live within a day. But they didn't do that with Bitcoin. And there was a really good reason why. Because it was Bitcoin, right? There's a lot of things going on with that. And they knew it was really important to work with the agency and to make sure that they got that contract right. Things like initial margin, variation margin. This was a very volatile contract, a really volatile, not contract, but instrument. If you go back to the beginning of 2017, what was its price? $830, right? And it doubled from 2015. By the end of 2017, it was $19,500, right? What did that mean for the agency? What it meant was white-hot intensity focus by everybody outside the agency, on the agency, and what we were doing. Because it was not just FOMO, it was intense. It was from Congress, it was from trade groups, it was from everybody involved with Bitcoin, it was from the exchanges. So you can imagine what that does to whatever agenda the chairman wanted to bring through at that time. It was basically kind of put off to the shelf for just a little bit because every division, every head of division had to get up to speed on what was going on in Bitcoin. And as I mentioned, we had our funding cut, right? So it's really hard to just throw bodies at this problem. So really, it took a lot of effort across so many different people to bring that futures contract into place. But they got it done. So just really quickly, let me tell you about the future of Bitcoin, because I think you're kind of interested, right? Here's the best thing I can tell you about Bitcoin. It's still there. It has not been hacked. Yes, a lot of people have lost their private keys. Yes, a lot of people have been hacked. Yes, some of the platforms have been hacked. By the way, side note, go read the New York State Attorney General's research on the virtual market integrity report. Fascinating, fascinating read. Everyone in this room should read that because a lot of the crypto trading platforms are platforms. They're not exchanges, and they don't operate with the same rules and regs that we do with an exchange. So you want to read that. But getting back to Bitcoin, this is what I see for it. It's fantastic. The combination of those 3 older technologies, peer-to-peer networking, cryptography, distributed ledger technology, those have been around for a long time. It was obviously the combination of all those together that was really unique. And like I said, I mean, it's just incredible that it's lasted this long, and it really shows the resiliency of it. So here's what I'll say about it. It's fascinating that developed as a way around the regulatory system, right? That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have it private. They wanted to have private transactions, which they did pseudonymously. Here's what's fascinating. They now want to be regulated, right? They want the seal of approval from the CFTC. All the ICOs want the seal of approval now from the SEC. Why do they want that? Well, Colleen mentioned earlier, I heard from a third person, that a lot of this is leaving, going over to Switzerland, and maybe that's where things are headed. But it'll only go so far. What that universe needs, what that ecosystem needs, is credibility. And it's getting it. The longer it goes on, the more it gains credibility and the more investors want to have exposure to it. So let me just leave it with that thought. It is truly the Wild West of finance. There's all sorts of issues, cyber issues, manipulation issues, regulatory issues around these cryptocurrencies, but they are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And I really enjoyed getting to understand that and getting to see what was going on there when it came to the cryptocurrencies because, of course, at the end of the day, I worked for Crypto Dad. Thank you very much.
We read dozens of news sources, so you only have to read one. John Lothian News.